What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another Warhammer 40k Tech Talk. This is the Warhammer 40k video series where I take a list that recently did well at a 40k event, talk about the event that the list participated in, some of the technology surrounding the list itself, and the matchups that it played. Today we're talking about Jack Harpster's list that won the Las Vegas Open 2023, the biggest event of the Warhammer 40k season, a huge 1,000 player singles event in, obviously, Las Vegas, Nevada, the biggest event in the world for Warhammer 40k, and the capstone of the competitive ITC season. For those who don't know, that stands for Independent Tournament Circuit, and is the de facto global ranking system for Warhammer 40k tournaments. So, this event not only typically crowns the winner of the ITC season itself, because scores are capped at the event. This is the last event to go on a player's record. As always, if you enjoy this style of content and my Warhammer 40k videos, you can drop a like in the video, a subscribe on the channel, all that YouTube stuff, you know the drill. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And let's dive into some Blood Angels. The player that wins LVO not only wins lots of accolades and tons of ITC rankings points, but also has to go through an enormous number of games of 40k to actually get there. The event is a 3-day, 9-round Swiss paired tournament that cuts to a top 8 after the end of day 2. So the players will play 3 rounds on the first day, 3 rounds on the second day. Any undefeated players who don't have any losses or draws on their record after those first 6 games are then put into a secret shadow round. If there is an odd number of players, they will be paired against each other and will play an additional game, the score of which does not matter until there is only 8 players remaining. At that point, the last 8 will play in a single elimination bracket to be crowned that year's LVO champion. In this case, this meant that Jack Harpster had to play 10 consecutive games of Warhammer 40k in a weekend and win every single one of them in order to be the champion. And that's what he did. Yeah, he won 10 games of 40k. That's a lot of Warhammer 40,000. Now, the event itself was played in the Warzone Nephilim format. So while we have been progressed into the Warzone Arcs of Omen format, which has changed a lot, especially about how list building works, and new data slate updates have changed a lot of the faction balance, the rules cutoff for this event had closed before any of those rules were announced, which meant that the tournament used the previous season's rules. This changed a couple things, most notably Armor of Contempt, which Blood Angels had access to. They lose that moving into the Arcs of Omen season, so if you go to a tournament next weekend and try to play this list, things are going to be a little bit different. They also lose access to some secondaries that we're going to be talking about today, but they get a lot of free upgrades, so their army lists will generally be much larger than the army list that we're going to be talking about in this video. The event also used player-placed terrain. While the terrain on each table was a standardized format, where the pool of terrain available to that table was mostly the same across tables that shared that same pool, the pool that you got every round was random, because the tables would each have a different set of terrain. This terrain was then divided up evenly between the 2 players. Generally speaking, the layouts were symmetrical, but occasionally they weren't, and players had slightly different terrain on each side. Then players would take turns placing the terrain in their territory on their half of the table. Now, this does a couple things for you. First off, if you win the roll to drop the first terrain feature, that's a big deal for you, because you can kind of dictate the flow of the battle over the center of the table. That's huge for melee armies like the Blood Angels list that we're going to be talking about today. In addition, you're also basically guaranteed to have line of sight blocking terrain somewhere in your side of the table where you'd like it, or at least the line of sight blocking terrain that's available to you is certainly going to be where you would like to place it. Now there was some controversy about the terrain at the event and the level of terrain, especially that some of the ruins maybe weren't shaped particularly well in order to block line of sight from a lot of different angles, and that did skew the event a little bit. That made the boogeymen of this event, interestingly, Tau, because they could take advantage of some of the terrain placement to either deny their opponent optimal terrain placement to open up lanes of fire to shoot their ranged attacks downrange, or they could use their high mobility with units like Crisis Teams or Sunshark Bombers to get around enemy pieces of terrain and be able to shoot them anyway. Chaos Demons as well, obviously were performing very highly, and if they have solid terrain, that works great for them. And the last one was surprisingly Orcs. Orcs had a very strong showing all the way through the end of the event, even getting to the final round, as we'll talk about. While the list didn't play against Chaos Demons proper, there were some Chaos sub-factions that it did play against, and it did play against both Tau and Orcs over the course of the event. So Jack Harpster demonstrated his ability to pilot this list against the other boogeymen of the LVO meta. Now, what is the list in particular? Let's go over it. This is a Blood Angels list relying on a battalion using Commander Dante as the Warlord, not taking his Warlord trait, but getting access to his Warlord abilities, especially getting command points refunded for bringing him. Lamarties is in there as well as another option to take a Death Company unit in your army, and as an outlet to grant you those Chaplain litanies. A Sanguinary Priest bringing a jump pack, the Teeth of Terra, and the Soul Warden Warlord trait. This gives him an aura that allows nearby units to ignore mortal wounds on a 5+, and obviously a Sanguinary Priest being a Sanguinary Priest ignores normal damage on a 6+. That makes the Sanguinary Guard units in this army significantly harder to kill with offensive effects like Smite. Mortal wounds are brutal for Blood Angels since their Armor of Contempt and high armor saves can't protect them, so having this Soul Warden in the list helps a ton in matchups like Tyranids or Thousand Suns, where you're expecting to take a lot of psychic powers and don't have any natural denies or psychic defense otherwise. Now, that's not all for the characters, because the list is actually bringing a Blood Angels auxiliary detachment. This costs Jack 2 CP, but allows him another slot to take a Sanguinary Ancient. Because there are 3 units of Sanguinary Guard and 3 units of Death Company in the list elsewhere, there are no elite slots available to take that Sanguinary Ancient, and his inclusion is absolutely critical in order to unlock especially the Relic Wrath of Baal. He's also taken the Rights of War Warlord trait on this guy to grant objective secured to all of these infantry and characters. The important bulk of the list is its infantry, and Blood Angels melee infantry is some of the best in 40k. The list is bringing 3 units of Sanguinary Guard, 3 units of Death Company, and 2 units bringing a mix of Power Fists, Power Swords, and Inferno Pistols. These are absolutely critical to score one of Blood Angel's most crucial secondaries, that being Fury of the Lost. Every turn in which a Death Company unit kills an enemy unit, you're going to be getting 3 points for that, and if 1 or more Death Company units died, you're also going to be getting an additional point. Because there are 4 total Death Company units in the list, you have the opportunity to essentially rocket out 3 separate units, kill an enemy unit, and ensure that your opponent then has to kill you back, scoring you 4 points. Over the course of the game, if you do this 4 times, you're going to be maxing that secondary out at the 15-point mark. A departure in this list from normal Blood Angels lists is the inclusion of this last set of units, this being 3 units of 5 Primaris Infiltrators. These guys give you an immense amount of forward deploy, which allows the list to put a ton of forward pressure on its opponent if it goes first. Those Death Company have access to the Forlorn Fury stratagem, which allows them to move before the game begins, meaning that one of these Death Company units can be rocketing up the table, then, when it goes to your turn, moving again and charging into their lines. If you've deployed the Infiltrators aggressively, you can also be charging the Infiltrators simultaneously, which puts a ton of pressure on your opponent, pens them into their deployment zone, forces them to focus fire on the units that you've put on their side of the table, and gives you a turn to set up with the Sanguinary Guard to ram into them on turn 2. These Infiltrators also have some other benefits. Because that Forlorn Fury can't move those Death Company within 9 inches of enemy models, meaning that if your enemy has a lot of forward deploy units, the Infiltrators can potentially screen them out of any place that they could drop and stop your Death Company from moving before the first turn begins. Lastly, those 3 Infiltrator units give this list a ton of objectives secured. Between the Infiltrators and the Rights of War aura from the Sanguinary Ancient, every single infantry model in this army has the ability to gain objective secured, which, especially compared to a lot of other offensive melee lists or even Blood Angels list, is a massive amount of objective secured that not many armies can deal with. You also have the opportunity to keep that Sanguinary Ancient alive using stratagems like Angel Sacrifice, which forces your opponent to target one of your other characters. This is often used with Dante or with the Sanguinary Priest, who can tank a bunch of hits for that guy and allow him to retain control of objectives when the time is right. Combined with the aggression that this list can present, especially when it goes first, in many games it was Jack's strategy to essentially jam this army into the center of the table and expect that his opponent didn't have enough beef to deal with all of the Sanguinary Guard and Death Company before they were able to deal massive damage to their opponent's army. The other benefit of these Infiltrators is that when you're in a situation like that and you're trying to kill 21 Sanguinary Guard, 15 Death Company and 4 very powerful individual characters that are bearing down in your army, most armies don't have the opportunity to kill 15 infiltrators on top of that are also representing defensive stratagems like smokescreen or transhuman physiology. This means that these infiltrators can sit in the back, steal objectives from you, provide objectives secured to the Blood Angels front line, and just generally rack up primary objective points while the Blood Angels secondaries are scoring massive secondary points. Speaking of those secondaries, secondary objectives is one of the biggest benefits that Blood Angels have, at least in the Nephilim format. They can rely very heavily on that Fury of the Lost with this 4 Death Company composition. They also get huge benefits from secondaries like Shock Tactics, grants them victory points when they take objectives from enemy units, and Relentless Assault, which gives them victory points just for touching the enemy deployment zone with one of their units. Moving aggressively forward with 14-inch moving jump packs thanks to that Wrath of Baal relic, and potential pre-game moves alongside infiltrators moving up on the first turn, charging it +1 and getting pile-in and consolidate moves. It's very easy to be getting at least one model to touch your opponent's objective every turn, and your opponent's going to be so hemmed in that they have a tough time getting back to your own side. So that is a lot about the list in particular. Let's talk about the games that it played. A pool of 1,000 players is quite a bit to dip into, so the first couple games of LVO tend to be kind of a crapshoot. Round 1, Jack was paired against Jared Rahati playing Necrons. This is a pretty classic fast Necron build that Jack was able to take down 100-53. Moving on, he was up against the indomitable might of Chaos Knights. However, their defensive effects were not able to stop him from scoring a convincing 90-60. That put him into the final round of day 1 undefeated against Wallace O'Donnell's Disciples of Be'lakor, combining a ton of different demon allegiances along with Be'lakor's classic war dogs. However, Jack was still able to take it down 100-53. That brought us to day 2, where the list played against Leagues of Votann and Alex Spithopoulos' Ymir Conglomerate. Despite the immense shooting of this list, rocking even Brokir Thunderkin alongside a Hecaton Land Fortress and a ton of Hearthkin Warriors, this list did go down 40 points to 97 in favor of Jack. Moving on to round 5 was potentially the tightest matchup that Jack ran into over the course of the event, paired against Corey Schultz and his absolutely wild Mefrit Necron Dynasty build. I'm going to talk about this build in a later video, so I'm not going to go too far into all of the insanity that it does here, but it had a Tesseract Vault in it, as well as Doom Scythes and the Silent King, and the massive amount of mortal wounds able to be dealt by both the Tesseract Vault and the Catan Shard of the Deceiver that the list also brings had originally beaten Jack down to a draw, 85-85 points. However, after the round was submitted, Jack realized that he did have a path to victory, and before the models were cleaned up, he was able to roll that out with Corey and ended up able to clinch the victory 86-85, an absolute barn burner of a finish. That advanced Jack to round 6, the final round before the mysterious Shadow round against Brian Seep and his Orcs. Despite the fact that Orcs can put an immense amount of aggression on the Blood Angels army, and especially a Death Skulls Orc list that runs universal objective secured on all of those infantry, it was not enough to beat the martial prowess of the Blood Angels, and Jack was able to take that matchup down 100-54. Especially the fact that the Blood Angels are also bringing a similar amount of objective secured, not only with those infiltrators, but also the Rites of War aura on the Sanguinary Ancient, and with the ability to heroically intervene with units like Sanguinary Guard. The normal Death Skulls strategy of towing your objectives with individual models like Commandos or Orc Boys is no longer very reliable, and Jack can punish that pretty severely, which he did, winning 100-54. That put Jack into the Shadow round against TJ Lanigan. This was the 4th round that these players played on day 2 of the event, and this is a win and in into top 8 of the event. The score here did not matter. If either of these players won, they would immediately qualify for the quarterfinals. And in this case, Jack was able to put TJ Lanigan in a position where he was unable to win after an early turn in the game. So that put Jack up into the quarterfinals against Evan Tomchin's Tau Empire, the other boogeyman of the event. This is a classic style of Tau Sept list running bricks of Crisis Battlesuits backed up by Sunshark Bombers and Tau Commanders. But the ability to place terrain aggressively in positions that would benefit the Blood Angels allowed them to move up the table relatively unscathed. Definitely the benefit of that Armor of Contempt on an already difficult to chew through 2+ save, and the ability of that Sanguinary Priest to make basically 30% of those failed saves against 2 damage weapons like missile pods or overcharged ion blasters essentially pass thanks to his damage ignore roll. The Blood Angels were able to withstand the shooting to win that game 97-63. That brought Jack to the semifinals of LVO 2023 against Mike Porter, another ITC winning hopeful, and this made the semifinals very exciting because this was essentially the battle for the winner of the ITC season. Because the other frontrunners of ITC had been knocked out earlier in LVO, there was no chance that anyone else would beat these players on their race to the top. And whoever scored higher at LVO would get the requisite score to win the entire season. In this case, Jack went first and was able to rocket a Death Company unit deep into the Harlequin lines. However, that allowed a Solitaire to move out of the way using the Light Sadist stratagem and counterattack into the Blood Angels' backfield to kill a character and get some early secondary objective points. However, in order to put pressure into the center of the table, Mike had to commit all of his player troop filled Star Weavers into the objectives in the center. And Jack elected to essentially full commit his entire army, charging with Sanguinary Guard across every objective and killing every Harlequin transport on the table almost in a single turn. While the Sanguinary Guard took a ton of damage from the return fire shooting, they were able to tank the swing back with their -1 to hit, Armor of Contempt, 2+ saves, and just generally strong defensive effects, and kill back almost all of the Harlequin troopers on the swing back in Mike's own turn. From there, it was impossible for Mike to be able to come back into the mission, and they ended up calling the game 100-61 in favor of Jack Harpster. That secured Jack the win for ITC 2022 season, but he had not yet won the LVO 2023. He had to beat his final opponent, Sean Naden. Sean was also playing Orcs and had put up a resounding show over the course of the event, only dropping a handful of points across all of his games. Sean also came out of the gate swinging, winning basically every early game roll, able to deploy the first unit, which forced Jack back, unable to deploy his infiltrators in the optimal positions to screen out the center of the table, also dropping the first piece of terrain, which prevented Jack from being able to place terrain optimally in the middle of the table as well, and winning the roll to go first, which prevented Jack from alpha striking with his Death Company squads. However, Sean decided to end the game quickly and go for the throat, declaring the Orc Wa on the first turn, giving his entire army advance and charge and an invulnerable save. This was in order to get his bike-riding war boss up into the Blood Angels lines early in the game. And while war bikers and storm boys, as well as some forward-deploying commandos and a disembarking unit of truck boy orc knobs armed with power claws, a perfect weapon at killing Sanguinary Guard, that war boss that Sean was relying on to deliver his Alpha Strike was not able to make the charge. This was crippling for Sean's Alpha Strike, and while he did deal a reasonable amount of damage, didn't quite deal the damage he needed to break the back of the Blood Angels. On the swing back, Blood Angels killed a lot of units in the center of the table and were able to engage a lot of the Orc transports and prevent them from pushing farther into the Blood Angels lines. While Sean made some incredible plays in order to engage the Sanguinary Guard, prevent them from optimally making their combat moves, and kill as many of them as he could with his power claws off of his knobs and mega knob units, it wasn't quite enough, and the swing back from the Blood Angels killed most of the Orc knobs on the table. The biggest downside here is that Sean had picked a bunch of secondaries that required his Gretchen to score them, including Get the Good Bits and the Green Tide. Because he had played so aggressively, his Gretchen were forced to engage into the Blood Angels models and try to prevent them and keep the Orc knobs alive. While a lot of Sanguinary Guard died and the Orcs looked like they could win the attrition fight, with all of the Gretchen dead, Sean could no longer score reliably. And it looked like both the Orcs and Blood Angels were going to mutually annihilate, giving Jack the win based on secondaries like Fury of the Lost, which scores up passively as long as those Death Company keep killing units every turn, which they had been for the entire game. At this point, around the start of turn 3, Sean realized that he could no longer catch up in score, and he conceded the game to Jack, giving Jack not only the ITC win that he'd gotten the previous turn, but also the LVO 2023 win. This was an absolute insane final round for the event. Two armies that not many players expected to get to the finals. We expected a lot of Chaos Demons, perhaps some Tyranids, perhaps some Tau, but these two melee beatstick forces fought it out for the final game. And that's why, at least in the Nephilim season, Blood Angels have ended on top as the best army in Warhammer 40k, and with Jack Harpster as the best Warhammer 40k player. Huge congratulations to him for taking down, again, not only the event, but also the ITC season as a whole. Congratulations to the entire team Art of War for crafting such a competitive group of players who are able to continuously play hard and win these LVO events 2 years back to back. And congratulations to Blood Angels for formulating the Artificer armor of the Sanguinary Guard. That's all I have to say about this Blood Angels list. Let me know down in the comments what you think about it and whether you think Blood Angels will be similarly powerful in the Arcs of Omen season. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks as well for everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and wonderful, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.